Hello there. I'm gonna beat Kerbal's space program again. That's right, starting from a fresh blank science mode save, I'm gonna have to go from building barely flight-worthy nuggets to space stations, satellite networks, and EVE returns. I've played science mode before, but I've had a few comments recently suggesting that I do it again, but not as a tutorial. Instead, just have a fun old time designing rockets that are overly complex and probably ill-conceived to beat the game in an entertaining and perhaps, dare I say, inspiring way for people already familiar with it. And I'm going to keep things stock, but with all the beautification mods that turn the game from this slop into a beautiful game. That sentence started well, at least. So, these are going to be my game settings. It's going to be a science mode save. Here are the difficulty settings. It's all left on default, with ComNet enabled, of course. And of course, we've got to name it Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. Good lord, that's loud! This is the tech tree. We're going to have to unlock every single node on this thing in order to officially beat the game. Right now, we've only got the very first node available, which gives us not a lot of stuff to work with for our first rocket. If we head on over to the VAB, you can see that our selection of spaceship spares is so scarce, our sole solution is a simple sorry rocket of a single SRB, 4 goo sciences, a single seat pod, and shoot. Seriously, this is literally it. And I'll stop with the alliteration now. Seriously. But in all seriousness, our science collection has begun. I ran a crew report with Jebediah Kerbin on the pad. We then went on EVA, took an EVA report, made sure to take the crew report from the pod and then restore it so we can do another one later on. Then we can run our first mystery goo experiment and then we can launch. So now that we are airborne, we can run our next mystery goo experiment. The goo jiggles and wobbles as it flies. We're gathering science from, flying through Kerbin's atmosphere. We can then do a crew report as well. That was why it was very important to take the crew report from the launch pad. I know I'm sort of talking through the mission at this stage, even though I said this wasn't meant to be a tutorial, but, just sort of providing context in case someone here has not played science mode before. I don't know. And I guess that, some people might be using this as a tutorial. I'm not sure. I wouldn't recommend it, but I will still mention kind of the key things I'm doing, at least in the first kind of few missions / episodes where, you'll be seeing concepts that you might not be used to seeing before. You ready? The chute is now deploying. The craft has stabilized, so now it's going to be a good idea for Jebediah Kerbin to go on EVA, take our crew report out again, and then store it so we can run another crew report when splashed down, and we can do an EVA report whilst out here as well. That's why I took the crew report mid-air rather than waiting until splashdown, because we've got to go on EVA anyway, do an EVA report. And yeah, now it's just a case of time warping down to our splashdown point. Are you ready? There we go. It is a historic moment. Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one, has landed. Its very first craft. We can run our last little bits of science. Jebediah Kerbin can go on EVA and somehow take a surface sample. Must have dived pretty quickly and deeply there to get that, and then we can recover our vessel and see what rewards we can reap. Is that the correct way of saying that? Reap what? I'd see what science we can unlock. And the answer is not a lot. I only have 58.2 science points, so really rather limited in what we can unlock at this stage. I'm really going to be prioritizing the bottom kind of half of the tech tree, because that half contains the science experiments. And obviously the more science experiments you're running on a mission, well, the more science you're going to rack up, the more points you get, the faster we progress through the tech tree. So I've unlocked the thermometer and the barometer. And that was kind of the objective after the first flight. Now I'm just sort of having a look at the other tabs available to us. And I eventually decided that I would unlock general rocketry as the other thing I unlock after our first flight. It really doesn't matter. You kind of need every node of the tech tree, so there's not really many consequences to unlocking things, in the wrong order, so to speak. But general rule of thumb, we want to be prioritizing the science branch. At least until we get the Science Junior. That's kind of the main goal we want to be working towards at the very beginning of our Kerbal space program, a science mode career. Anyway, as you can see, I'm currently speed building our second rocket. It consists of 8 FLT-200 tanks powered by the swivel engine with 4 little fins for guidance. We've got 2 mystery goo experiments as well as the thermometer and barometer, the 2 science experiments we unlocked using the science earned from our first flight. And for this one, we're going to be launching from the runway. Okay, and here we are, ready to launch. Oh no, oh dear, it appears that the rocket has fallen over, causing untold damage and destruction. But no worries, we can just hit F9 and can pretend that none of that happened. And Kerbin's population can remain under the impression that Lowne Aerospace can do no wrong. And although I joke here, there are events that can have huge consequences for us all every single day in real life, and whenever that happens, media coverage can be a little inconsistent, which is why I've partnered up with Ground News as the sponsor of today's video. Ground News is a fantastic news source that reveals how stories are covered across the media. For example, jet engine maker Pratt & Whitney reached a tentative agreement with its workforce on the 23rd of May, following a 19-day strike of around 3,000 workers. But you probably didn't see this, as fewer than 40 outlets reported on it, and there was a fair amount of bias from left-leaning sources to right-leaning ones. Ground News' bias comparison tab shows us that left-leaning sources framed things primarily through worker solidarity and labour rights, while the right focused on the economic implications and casting scepticism on union demands. And looking at Ground News' bias distribution, only a third of sources were centre. Other stories you might have missed are highlighted in Ground News' blind spot feed, a feature that lets you see stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum that you might have otherwise never come across. Ground News is a brilliant service that I actually use because I think it's incredibly important that news should first and foremost be the truth, and Ground News strives to do just that. You can get a 40% discount off their Vantage plan. Go to ground.news/Matt Lowne, linked below, or scan that QR code on screen. Thank you so much to Ground News for sponsoring this video. So as you can see, the rocket is now primed on the runway, ready to lift off. The reason I'm launching from the runway is because in the eyes of the game, the runway is a different biome to the launch pad, which means we can gather science from the runway that's different to the science we can gather while stationary on the launch pad. That's why we're launching from the runway in this instance. It's not very much science, but small amounts of science go a long way in the early game. I'm also using Bob Kerbin here because he's a scientist Kerbal, and he can restore the mystery goo units they can be used more than once, and later on the Science Junior as well. So he's going to be our main man for the time being. So we've run all of our science experiments, done a crew report, taken the crew report from the pod and stored it back in again. And with that said and done, it's time to launch. I probably should have mentioned actually that if you do actually want a tutorial for KSP rather than, non-specific commentary, well, I guess my commentary has been fairly in-depth up until this point, but later on it certainly won't be. If you do want a tutorial series for unlocking the tech tree in Kerbal Space Program Science Mode, I do have a full Lowne Aerospace playlist. I'll link it in the description. There'll be a card on the screen right now as well, if you want to check that out. But yeah, I did say at the beginning of the video that the kind of idea for Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one, would be just kind of a fun playthrough with kind of cool craft designs that wouldn't necessarily be very good for a beginner to try and replicate. But obviously, kind of not the case for this particular, I guess I was going to say this part of the video, but kind of the first series of missions, because we don't really have a great deal of parts to work with. So the rockets we're building are going to be very similar to the kind of rockets you'd build in a tutorial style series, because like I say, there's only a very, very small number of parts that we can get our hands on. So yeah, I'm kind of just following the kind of mission plans of Lowne Aerospace 2, the second one, where I've launched this rocket into space on a suborbital trajectory mine, so we can gather science from the lower atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, and indeed space near to Kerbin. I also launched backwards, right? So normally in Kerbal Space Program, your gravity turn goes 90 degrees on the nav ball, so kind of with Kerbin's rotation, so that you save a bit of fuel getting to orbit. But in this case, I wanted to get to a different biome, and in this case I decided to go for the desert, just because we'll be landing in various different biomes after each mission. And purely anecdotally this, I feel like the desert is the biome I land in the least amount when it comes to returning from missions. I guess maybe just the location of the deserts isn't really very well placed for random landing encounters. I don't know. So we're going to go to the desert for the second mission, and as you can see, the desert is below us. We are re-entering. As you can see, we didn't burn up much ablator, so that's why I reduced the amount of ablative material on our heat shield, because we really did need to be carrying that excess mass. And as you can see, all of our science experiments are attached to the pod itself, so we can kind of run experiments flying over the Kerbin desert biome. And with that, we are now landed in the Kerbin desert biome. So of course Bob Kerbin can go out on EVA and gather a surface sample, as well as do an EVA report. We can also take the existing crew report from the pod and then run another one. And we've just run that now, so now we can recover the vessel and see how much science we earned. 159 points. Gosh, I feel like a millionaire. And so I immediately rushed to the R&D building and unlocked basic science, which, as you can see, contains the Science Junior experiment. So yeah, the amount of science we're going to be netting from missions going forward is going to be more. We're going to get more science from missions. That sentence started off better in my head. And unlocking that node was really my only objective after doing our second mission. So after this, doesn't really matter a great deal what we're unlocking. I decided to go for advanced rocketry and stability. But, you know, if you want to unlock a different node, then that's okay. That's fine. So let us crossfade back to the vehicle assembly building and begin speed assembling our third launch vehicle. Now, you know, this is very, very similar to the rocket used on our second mission, but instead of bringing mystery goo and the thermometer and the barometer with us, we're going to be bringing Science Junior units with us, because of course that's the new science thing that we've unlocked. I started off with 3 units until I remembered that actually we only need 2 units, because we have Bob Kerbin on board who can restore one of them mid-flight. So there's the rocket there. The reason I needed more than one Science Junior unit was because I want to run a Science Junior experiment in the lower atmosphere and the upper atmosphere, and you know, that will be during the rocket's ascent, and Bob can't go on EVA during the ascent to reset the units for what are hopefully fairly obvious reasons. He can go on EVA to reset the Science Junior though from the experiment we just ran from the launch pad, and now we can launch. There we are, staging. I don't want any comments, by the way, commenting about the appearance of the rocket with those solid rocket boosters attached, by the way, in the comments. Please refrain, keep things family friendly. As you can see, I have now run the topmost Science Junior experiment because we're in the lower atmosphere. You can kind of see our flying situation in the top middle right, the Kerbal Engineer readouts there. It says situation, it says we're flying low. I'm just going to wait until that says flying high, and then we can run the other Science Junior experiment. Now I'm holding kind of a 45-degree angle of attack here, and I'm actually, there we are, we've just changed the situation to flying high, so I've now run the other Science Junior experiment. I haven't got to do anything like a crew report or obviously mystery goo, thermometer, etc., because we've done those on previous flights. As you can see, I'm holding this fairly steep angle of attack because I want our apoapsis to not be orbital, but instead be above 250 kilometers. Because, like with the lower atmosphere and the upper atmosphere, there is science in space near to Kerbin, or in this case, the situation on Kerbal Engineer readout says in space low. Then you get different science for space high above Kerbin, or in space high. And space high around Kerbin starts at 250 kilometers. I think. This isn't a tutorial. I couldn't remember if it was 250, it was the cutoff, or 300 was the cutoff. So I made my apoapsis 303 just in case it was 300 kilometers. But I now see, watching the video with you guys, well, you know, I'm watching it ahead of time, right? Because you know how videos work. And I noticed actually we changed from in space low to in space high at 250 kilometers. Hey, maybe this is tutorial. Like I said, that's not going to be kind of what this series is about, but for the first kind of, you know, flights, it's going to be like that because there's only really so many ways you can build up your rockets to get the science needed to go and visit other, you know, celestial bodies in the game, have a fun old time exploring, planting flags and footprints, etc., etc. And, you know, this is a good time to talk about this because there we are, we've landed. That concludes the final terrestrial flight. Is that the correct nomenclature? I'm not sure. But basically, our next mission is going to be landing on the surface of... I didn't even try to like build suspense. We're going to be landing on MINMUS, obviously, because that's kind of the next logical place to land with our tech that we've got. Like I say, early game, there are only so many things you can really realistically do. MINMUS is kind of the most sensible option. I'm unlocking the electrics tab in the R&D building just because we need a solar panel, you know, a means of regenerating electric charge. And also I noticed that we have the EVA experiments kit in the miniaturization tab. So I decided to unlock that as well, just because that actually nets you quite a significant amount of science when you run the experiment while on EVA, which is going to be very, very helpful because I'm kind of playing by similar rules to Lowne Aerospace 2, in that I'm setting a rule where I can only land once on a certain planet or moon. So if I land on MINMUS, I can't then biome hop, basically, to farm science and maximize our output. We get one chance to gather science from the surface of a planet or moon, and that's it. So again, it's not as true because I'm not playing efficiently or sensibly, but doing it this way, just that we're kind of varying up the places that we go. And obviously, this means that this kind of encourages me to go to places that are a little bit harder to reach in order to net more science. Now, during this playthrough, I'm definitely going to include an Eve landing, and that's one of the reasons why you may have noticed, I know this is a brilliant time to bring this up this late into the video, that I've chosen to not have restock installed. So, you know, for a while now, I've been using the mod restock in my KSP videos. Basically, reskins all the stock parts, makes them look much nicer. But I've been told it's not quite fully visual. It does have a minimal impact on the aerodynamic performance of some of those parts, which generally, you know, in general, brilliant, it has a non-significant effect on gameplay. But Eve is a very challenging place to go to. And so kind of those margins can suddenly start having a bit of an impact. So mainly for the Eve mission, I wanted to make sure this was fully stock, only visual mods, and restock I felt was just too far into the potentially game-altering territory. Just because a lot of, well, I don't see a lot, but I see a few comments every now and then on the KSP subreddit saying, oh, I tried to follow Matt Lowndes' Eve tutorial and I couldn't launch. And everyone's saying, oh, well, you know, the game's probably updated since that came out and the rocket no longer works. And I want to prove that rocket does still work. The game has not changed significantly. Unfortunately, I don't want to sound like a douche here, guys, but it's probably a skill issue because Eve is very, very difficult to do a return from. And, you know, I just kind of want to prove that that video still works. Oh, I should probably point out that I've replaced Bob Kerman's parachute with the EVA experiments kit that we unlocked in the R&D building on our last unlock run. And look at that, Genesis 4 has launched. And you might be wondering, Matt, why have you built kind of the core first stage out of the really stumpy tanks? And to be honest, guys, I just wanted to have an orange first stage and make the rocket look cool. And, you know, the other size tanks I have can only be colored grey or white. So I decided to use these tanks, which probably wasn't the smartest idea in hindsight because look how wobbly this rocket is. When I designed it, I was like, oh, you know what, I'll just right-click it and press Auto Strut and use Auto Struts to keep the rocket, you know, not wobbly. But this is how I learned that you don't actually get the Auto Strut feature unless you have unlocked struts in the tech tree, like in the R&D building. And I haven't unlocked struts yet. Similarly, you can't do things like enable fuel crossfeed with radial decouplers, etc. until you actually unlock fuel lines. So there you are, a little tip if you didn't know that before. And so, yeah, as a consequence of the very, very wobbly rocket, it was very, very hard to control, sort of tipped over, and now we have this really, really inefficient flight ascent profile. My intention was to use the stage we're currently burning to circularize around Kerbin and then put us on a, you know, trajectory to get to MINMUS. But now it's just going to be the stage that just gets us to low Kerbin orbit. In fact, we're not even going to circularize with it. I was like, well, we don't have a great deal of usable delta V left in the stage, 132 meters per second right now. So what it is, I'll almost circularize with it, but then just before our periapsis crosses the Kármán line, we will stage and then circularize with the MINMUS lander. The MINMUS lander itself has plenty delta V to not only get to MINMUS, but, you know, land on MINMUS and then return back to Kerbin. So none of this was really an issue. I just kind of copied my MINMUS lander design from my last playthrough of the tech tree, forgetting that I was using it to biome hop and maximize science output, and therefore, you know, making use of its elevated delta V levels. But hey, it kind of worked out quite well because I designed a terrible rocket to go underneath the lander, and therefore, you know, the lander's very, very over-engineered, well, not over-engineered, but surplus of fuel saved the mission, essentially. And so there we are. Bob Kerman has conducted the burn. There's going to, well, nearly anyway. There we are. We've got an encounter with MINMUS. We're going to have to do a course correction burn, but that's fine. Again, we have a lot of delta V in this rocket. So yeah, I hope you guys are on board with the idea of this little science mode playthrough. A lot of people probably are going to be disappointed that it's not modded and it doesn't include things like Outer Planets mod or Planetary Base Systems mods or Station Pass mods, etc, etc. But I hear you, okay? So I plan on doing 2 playthroughs, right? This one, so stock but with beautification mods only, and then a second playthrough, not unlocking the normal tech tree, but unlocking the community tech tree, which is kind of built around, like the whole tech tree is balanced around loads of different mods. So I can't remember exactly what mods it uses, but I know it uses like Natea's mod. It's basically really popular mods, and I think there's some integration with the Outer Planets mod. I could be incorrect there, so I'll have to just figure this out, I guess, once this little playthrough has concluded. But look at this, we have entered MINMUS's sphere of influence. Bob Kerbin, whilst I was talking, was just diligently doing his duties as a Kerbinaut, a scientist Kerbinaut, in fact. So he went on EVA, well, he read a crew report, went on EVA, took the crew report from the pod, then did an EVA report, did all the other science experiments as well, and restored the Science Junior and Mystery Goo. That way we can do all of that again now in space low to MINMUS. Obviously, when we just entered its sphere of influence, we were in space high above MINMUS. Now we can do it again in low to MINMUS. In case you're kind of wondering why you even need to continually go on EVA to take the crew report from the command pod and then store it, and then you can magically run another one. That's because basically, if you think of the crew pod like a science experiment, like the Mystery Goo, basically you right-click it, you run the experiment, it then stores the experiment on board. The Kerbal has to then take the experiment out, and then, I guess Mystery Goo is a bad example. It's more like the thermometer or barometer, where you can run them infinite number of times without restoring them. You just basically take the experiment out of the thermometer, then the thermometer can run again. Same thing with the command pod. So it's just a bit of an annoying quirk with Kerbal Space Program 1 that was beautifully handled in KSP2. KSP2's science mode, management system was light years ahead of KSP1, as it should have been, right? The whole game should have been better than KSP1, but, here we are, I guess. Here we are coming down over the serene, Greater Flats region of MINMUS. Yeah, I'm very devoid of creativity, aren't I? I'm like, we'll land on the flats because that's just the easy place to land on MINMUS. And I'm so yet not over. Let's try that whole sentence again. I'm still not yet over the beautification that comes with Games Links' Parallax Continued, which kind of creates this lovely little icy, reflective surface on the surface of the flats. So yeah, there's a good reason to still visit the MINMUS flats even now, because we have these wonderful mods installed for us. So now we've got down to the surface, we can do a few things. Bob can first of all grab a surface sample and an EVA report, and then you can walk over here to conduct perhaps the most important task of any Kerbal Space Program landing, and that is, of course, planting our very first Lowne Aerospace flag, so Genesis 4. I kind of call the first rockets of a playthrough the Genesis class because they always kind of look the same, right? So it's one class of rocket, and it's Genesis because Genesis means the beginning, right? And then we can run our EVA experiment, which is a little game of golf, it seems. There we are. Isn't that lovely? Not quite sure what could be gained from that, but Kerbals can apparently get 125 units of science from those EVA experiments, which is really, really good. I guess, it's kind of the same caliber as a surface sample, right, where a robot can't do the experiment. You have to be able to get a Kerbal down to the surface and then get that Kerbal back home in order to get the science. That's why I guess the reward is high. I guess we kind of have to ignore the fact that Kerbal could just get on board a vessel with an antenna and transmit the data back, but that's not really in the spirit of it, right? You want to be able to get that Kerbal home, get that little green frog back to their families on Kerbin, wherever their family lives. There are, of course, no cities or buildings of any kind on Kerbin aside from the space centers and I guess things like the pyramids. Is that a spoiler? Sorry guys, there are pyramids on Kerbin, but I haven't said where. I have done videos to them that were completely accidental. Was just flying around Kerbin and I was like, oh look, there's the pyramids. I didn't even know they were there. I just knew. So yeah, that's it's getting late. I've been recording for a little while. Well, 25 minutes. And obviously this is like where I start to flag in terms of keeping things on track, especially because, it's an early game playthrough. We are in the early game of the full playthrough. So I kind of want to keep things a bit on track just because I feel like people are like getting into Kerbal Space Program all the time. They're going to see this on my channel, they're probably going to Google, like, you know, first missions of science fair playthrough, and this is probably going to come up as a suggested video. So, you know, people are probably going to watch this to help them build their own spacecraft anyway. So at least for kind of the first few flights, I'll keep things semi-informative, like explaining what I'm doing. But then once we're on to things like, you know, Elu, Lathe, Eve, what's the other moon of Jewel called? Tylo, that was it. I don't know why that name escaped me so long. Like the other challenging moon of Jewel, I should say. Like once you do all those places, it's not going to be like, right, now you've got to do this. Like it's just going to be, well, I don't know, who knows? Those sometimes my videos can just spiral into, you know, chaotic streams of consciousness. So very much looking forward to meandering down those chaotic streams of consciousness with all of you up there to watch. What a brilliant advert for my channel. I just said that, you know, people trying to get into this game for the first time, they're going to find this video. This is their introduction to me. I hope it was a good sell. But yes, we have now staged. So now we are going to re-enter. Well, we are re-entering the atmosphere. I have better time warp installed in addition to the beautification mods, just so I can get faster than 4x physics warp, which is why you might have seen the thing shake about just a bit then, because I forgot I had that physics time warp setting installed, and well, yeah, the game didn't quite like that very much. But now we are below the clouds, and yeah, just ran a little cheeky crew report. We can then go on EVA, take the data and store it, and then run another one on touchdown. But going forward after this, science from Kerbin is going to be fairly negligible in terms of the science we're gaining from landing on whatever celestial body we're going to. In fact, to be honest, I don't even know why I bothered running it just then, because the data we got from MINMUS is exponentially more valuable than the data we're getting from Kerbin. But I guess that didn't stop me from doing one last little EVA to get a surface sample and EVA report and all that. And look at that! 1,148.5 sites is available to us to spend to our heart's content. So, struts. Definitely one of the things I definitely wanted to unlock. So I've unlocked the node that contains struts. And then from there, I just had a little scan of what's available. I decided that it would be sensible to unlock flight control, because then we get a little reaction wheel and some better tail fins. I also unlocked aviation because it was very cheap, and then space exploration as well, and advanced flight control for, I guess, just because we're going to need all the nodes, aren't we? And we've got landing as well, so we've got some bigger landing gear at our disposal for future flights. Then I just continued browsing what we had available and decided that fuel systems would be very useful to have, because then we get the fuel line and the ability to enable crossfeed on decouplers. Then we got heavy rocketry, so we can build heavy rockets. And then I unlocked heavier rocketry, so we can build even bigger rockets, giving us the mainsail engine as well. Now we're sort of dwindling in terms of how much science we have remaining. Advanced exploration is objectively good because it has the lab, but I'm banning myself from using that in this playthrough. And then I noticed the command modules node. This contains an Apollo-style lunar lander can and an Apollo-style command pod. And considering that, you know, it makes sense that our second mission goes to the Mun, we can now do a proper Apollo-style Mun mission with Apollo-style pieces for that. So yes, very much deviating now from tutorials for beginners. I then unlocked advanced construction just because, don't know, thought the parts looked pretty good. I didn't really think it through beyond that, to be honest. And then the final node that I decided to unlock was propulsion systems. Yeah, the little Oscar B tank is always useful. So yeah, and that about pretty much does it. You know, we've only got 63.5 science remaining, so not enough to unlock anything else for now. So now it's time to think about doing the Mun mission. But that's not going to be in today's video, guys. So make sure you subscribed and ring the bell so you get notified of that next installment of Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. Thank you so much to the names on the right-hand side of the screen. They're my Patreon members and my YouTube channel members who make all of this content possible. And of course, massive thank you once again to our sponsor today, which is Ground News. They've been supporting my channel for a few years now, and always great to have them sponsor again. So huge thanks for Ground News. Click that link below, guys. And yeah, thank you so much for watching the first installment of Lowne Aerospace 3. I hope you enjoyed it. I very much always welcome feedback, because I haven't done a playthrough like this in a little while. Might be good to get some input from you if you think there's something I could do that can make things